Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us this morning. We are really pleased to have Holden Fleming, the housing coordinator of the city of Port Angeles, join us today. And Holden previously worked at the county, Clallam County, in the Department of Community Development. I'll let him share a little bit more about his background. And he is a certified planner. He is going to share with us the status basically of where the city of Port Angeles is. And I bet he could probably answer some questions more generally about the unincorporated county area based on his background. And then also some of the policies that the city has implemented as of late. So just a few housekeeping items beforehand. If you'll put yourself on mute so we don't inadvertently pick up any background noise or dogs barking, that kind of thing, I would appreciate that. And if you have any questions, go ahead and put it in the chat, or if you prefer, which is what I prefer, raise your hand and ask a question. We like this to be as interactive as possible. So, whoop, I heard a dog. So with that, I am going to hand it off to Holden. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Holden. One thing I want to say, though, is what we're finding not just in Clallam County, but across the state, is that every county is dealing with housing issues, and housing has become an economic development issue, because if you don't have the housing, you can't support the really great business opportunities that are being offered in Washington state because of our clean energy. And it's a major limiting factor for us to improve the quality of life of our existing workforce and citizens. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to Holden. Take it away, Holden. Thank you for joining us.
Hey, thank you, Colleen. So, and getting invited to this, I'll say this is supposed to be coffee with Colleen, but I don't have my coffee this morning, and so I feel like I'm only really getting half of the what I was promised. But I'll worry about that later. I do want to thank everybody. It is very early in the morning, 8 o'clock, and so to jump on Zoom this early, I commend everyone for being here. And I think that just points to how important of a topic housing is, and how it relates to so many different things. As Colleen said, at this stage in Washington, housing is just as much of an economic driver as it is just a basic necessity for a community. Now, the city of Port Angeles has done a lot of great work recently. I've actually only been with the city for 6 months now. Prior to that, I was a senior planner for Clallam County, where I was able to work on a regional level on a lot of different great topics. But prior to that, I am actually in Washington by way of Texas, where we also did things like community development and housing. And so I've got a pretty broad look at what housing looks like, how that looks like in different states, and how that looks like in different communities. And so, I'm excited to give my presentation, but then more so than that, I'm excited to just talk about housing. My role is a housing coordinator. It is not a housing czar. My job is to connect people. My job is to communicate with people. My job is to take ideas from the community, from other stakeholders, and try to mesh them all together, get them to work together, and help move everybody forward. And so it'll be a relatively short presentation this morning, and then we'll have ample time to just talk, because that's, I think, where we can get those creative juices flowing, and we can get some ideas going that are specifically applicable to our region and our area. So now let me see if I can go ahead and share my screen. And can everybody see those slides?
Yes.
Very good. All right, wonderful. So lovely title screen. All right, so what we plan to talk about today. So we'll talk about what Port Angeles, as far as housing looked like only 5 years ago, 2017 versus today. Then we'll take a look at some of the select housing actions that the city has taken since 2016. Then we'll get into a little bit more depth related to our new temporary building permit fee waiver. And then we'll discuss the city steps moving forward.
I've got to listen to this right now. Okay.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So if you see here, we have relatively flat population growth, 2017 versus today. Less than 400 people have moved to our community according to this. That is, of course, the city, not the county. Incomes have remained relatively flat. Housing units, you look at the numbers that I have here, it's less than 300 units have been added in the last 5 years. But if you look at the housing cost, that number is, I think, the one that everyone's eyes kind of get big on. The housing cost nearly doubled just in the past 5 years, you know, and this 450,000 number right there, I think I actually got that off of Redfin, and so that wasn't even the listed prices for this year. That was the average sale price in our community, and so these are really big numbers, and I think, you know, everybody kind of has their reasons for why that housing cost could have exploded like that relative to all the other metrics. But the fact is as the housing coordinator, no matter what the reason for that explosive growth is, it is the reality that our residents are facing today. And in that, if somebody wants to buy a house, it's going to cost them a relatively very large portion of their income to do that.
Hey, real quick, Holden, can you go back to that slide?
Yeah.
So
There you go.
a couple things. Housing units. How have you been tracking the number of housing units?
Yeah, so you know, obviously there was the benchmark in 2020. We had the census and the data that was associated with that. Otherwise, we also utilized the American Community Survey, and then also the state of Washington Department of Commerce provides us with numbers as well. And so basically, we take those numbers, look at the methodology, and figure out which one we think is most accurate, and then we use the most current information that we can. The other great thing that we get to do is we get to track our own permits. And so if somebody's coming in for a new build, we obviously know how many units they're putting in.
And so what about the accuracy of that data? Do you find that between census, American Community Survey, OFM data versus your permitting data, you know, how accurate are those sources?
Yeah, so you know, they're all relatively close to one another, and so I think they're accurate enough to make decisions based off of. But what I specifically call one versus the other, well, you know, the problem with census or American Community Survey data is as soon as you get it, it's outdated already, and so, you know, those are good benchmark numbers, but you know, if the city is only permitting, you know, 40 to 50 houses per year, you know, it's not that much of a difference between the numbers that they're telling us and what we think could actually be out there, which I think is also speaks to the issue, in that, you know, we're only doing 40 to 50 units per year, and we need to be doing considerably more, and so that's just, you know, that's aspirational, hoping that as we continue to work on housing in our community, those numbers have to go up. So back in 2009, and this is off topic now, but back in 2019, the city commissioned a housing action plan that essentially said that we need more housing units, and that we are already behind the 8 ball on the number of units that are necessary for our community, and that we need to increase the number of units that are creating per year. And right now we're only doing about a quarter of what those numbers suggested. And so, you know, this is one of the reasons why I was brought on as the housing coordinator, is to be, you know, one point of contact with those metrics in mind, to see how I can work with community organizations like yours to try to drive additional growth and figure out what those barriers are and how we can meet those targets, because they're big goals. But if we don't do it now, it only gets harder with each year. This is a compounding problem.
So what is your average occupancy per housing unit in Port Angeles? And is that pretty typical of the county overall?
Yeah, give me 1 second. So I don't have that number memorized,
You
but I
don't?
do.
Sorry.
Colleen, let me get through this a little bit, and then I
Sure.
will find that form because I do have that number.
So, yeah, I mean, obviously the housing price skews everything, especially for our workforce. But and I see Jim just put something in the chat. So let's see. So that's 328 people as an increase in the population. And then the number of units that went up is let's see here, 9382, so 279 units. And I would think, I can't remember the stat I saw from across the county, but I believe it was over 2. So if
I've got 2.185.
Okay, yeah, which seems to make sense. So it looks like overall you're making a dent into the problem, because if your population has only gone up slightly and your number of housing units has gone up almost as much, that it was a bad situation to begin with, and that price of a house is what is really the problem. But adding more expensive homes is not really going to solve the problem I think you guys are trying to address, right?
Oh yeah, and that's actually something we'll get into in just a second. Is one of the things that housing action plan points to is we need a more diverse housing stock available to people looking to move into our community, or people looking to stay in our community, which is a big deal. And actually, as we look forward into the future, the ratios need to change, where we'll actually have less single family housing, less high end housing, and obviously more missing middle housing, as it were. But that's Colin, you bring it up a great point, which is that relative to our population growth, we are adding units. We're just not adding enough. And I think that is also reflected. A big part of that is in that housing cost that's seen there, and that supply isn't keeping up with demand in our region. And so as we've all seen the graph, right? And as demand goes up, if supply doesn't match it, the price goes up to match. And so that's what we're up against. And again, if you talk about from an economic development standpoint, and I believe that your organization was able to provide some data on that, the types of jobs necessary to bring to our community that could afford a house at that price are not the types of jobs that we are currently have in abundance. So it's great stuff to think about. But I do want to move on.
Okay. Yep.
So these are just some of the selected housing actions that we've taken since our 2016 comp plan update. So you'll see we allowed townhouses in 2017. We adopted ADU design standards in 2017. We listed ADUs as an accessory use in 2019. Duplexes became allowed throughout the city in 2019. That's when that housing action plan was adopted. Another big deal is in 2019, the city passed by popular vote a 0.1% sales tax specifically directed at affordable housing. Yeah.
Real quick, so townhouses were not allowed prior to 2017 in any zone?
That is my understanding. They were not either a defined use or were not allowed within the code. And again, this is only 5 years ago. And if you think townhouses are, every major city has rows of them. And it's one of those things too, where if you look back at Port Angeles housing prior to that 2016 comp plan update, it provided for a very narrow type of housing, housing really directed at, one type of individual. And so, yeah, you'll see a big part of this as you look at 2016 and then move forward, is it's creating a variety of housing types. It's allowing for a variety of housing types with the obvious understanding that different people need different types of housing. Developers want to develop different types of housing, and that the more we make housing types available, the easier it's going to be for individuals to find the housing type that fits their needs. The other thing that we did here, if you take a look, is we waived the utility base rates associated with ADU housing just earlier this year. We reduced the minimum lot size in the R7 zone down to 3,500 square feet. And so, as well as increasing the different types of housing, we're making it easier to find those lots where you can put a house on. We're making it easier so that if you have your house and you want to add an ADU, that those utility base rates are waived because you already have service to the house. The base rates, essentially it should cover the cost to get the service to the property, and then obviously the usage rates are associated with how much you actually use it. And so at a house already developed with a single family home, it makes sense that an accessory dwelling unit would have its base rates waived. And so we're looking at this, we're making incremental progress. But I think it's obvious that even with all of these changes, you see duplexes became allowed throughout the city in 2019. We haven't had a boom of duplexes being built in the city post 2019. Townhouses have been here for 5 years. We don't just have an overabundance of townhouses available now. And so I think that then brings up the question, which is, now that these uses are allowed, why aren't we seeing development in that direction? And I think that's a topic for a larger discussion. And I think that's, again, where I'd love to kind of point the conversation as we finish off the presentation part of this, and to try to really figure out as a community what that missing spark is, why we're not seeing those types of developments, and then if it's anything that the city can do to either help spur that type of development or get out of the way and make it easier. I think we want to do that because we've recognized the need for these. Now we just want to see them actually being developed. Another one on this list, obviously, is that the city hired a housing coordinator. That's me, and I'm so glad to be here. And I think that points to the city's recognition of just how important this topic is, that they're willing to devote staff time specific to it. And also just that, it's nice to have a singular point of contact for everyone that's in this chat right now, that if you have questions concerning housing, or if there's issues that are coming up, that you can have one person to go to, and that's what I get to work on, and that's what I get to focus on, all while understanding that, for all the work we do today, one of the biggest things that the city can do right now is begin to look at some of the policies in place and how we can change them to shape not just tomorrow, but the next 20 years. Because, that's the beauty of our community, is that it's not a static, stuck in time entity, and that it will continue to change and adapt and evolve over time. And if we plant those seeds now, if we create those policies now, we can see those fruits yield years into the future. And so, again, real happy to be here. It's a big deal, though.
Yep.
None of this is easy.
One thing, Holden, I worked with a property owner that owned a lot of commercial properties that were zoned. I think one was like some kind of industrial, but it was actually an office space, and over off Tumwater Road. And he's for 4 years has been working with the city trying to get a conditional use permit so that he could turn them into studio apartments. And he has not been able to make any progress. 4 years with, a lot of, was working with Allison before she left. So I put him in touch with Lindsay, but I think I should also put him in touch with you. And I'm just curious if there's something that you could do to support him, and more so, and people that own commercial properties where it might make sense if they, the housing, or as housing demand has skyrocketed, the office demand because of remote work and ability to do work from home has really declined. Is the city looking at different processes that would make it easy for those property owners to lease their properties out for residential uses?
Yeah. So I'll tell you, my throw answers, it depends. That's kind of the beauty of a conditional use permit is, well, what conditions can we put on that makes it work for everybody? But what I can tell you as the housing coordinator is 100% that's what we want to see. I think right now you have a very involved city council who supports that type of movement forward. I think right now, if you look at the CED staff, Allison, is came and gone. Emma Bolin has come and gone, but the current group that we have now very much would be interested in getting. Well, I'd love to know what project that is in particular, figure out where it stalled out, and then figure out how we can get it back up and going. Because if we have individuals in our community who are willing and able to push forward housing development at a time when we need more housing, then I think we really need to be really critical of our own internal policies and our own internal processes as they relate to prohibiting housing development. And so whatever we need to do to get out of the way, mining health, life, and safety issues, I think we need to do that. And I think that's a big part of the reason why I was brought on with the city, is to say, yes, that's the way we've always done it, but it would benefit us if we stop doing it that way, at least until we can address these issues. If we go back in, the history of cities, commercial and residential uses were not bifurcated. I mean, the most common example I always have in my head, right, is something, if you've seen Gilmore Girls, right? They've got the diner down below, and the supporting characters live up above it. That type of housing and that type of flexibility that it adds for the work-live interaction is something that community's been doing forever, and we've got away from it for a while. But I think now we're seeing that has a real benefit, not just to downtowns either, but in other locations where a property owner may be able to do that. Why not do that? And so, yeah, we're right there together. And Colleen, again, after we finish up here, I'd love to get some more background on that. If for no other reason, then I'm curious and intrigued now, because 4 years is a long time to be working at something.
Yeah, absolutely. And had an attorney redid. Anyway, I'll talk to you offline about it, and I've already started a email to introduce you. So.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is like we're having coffee now. All
Yeah.
right. So all of those actions that the city has taken, I think all point to, and what I just spoke on briefly, is a willingness for the city to take a look at where we're at and realize that just because this is the way we've done things doesn't mean this is the way we need to continue to do things. And it also points to a willingness for the city to understand that we have to try something, because like I said, even with townhouses being allowed since 2017, ADUs coming in shortly after that, even though we're putting in these policies, we have not seen that just boom of that type of development. And so, what can we do next? What are the next things? And so one of the things that we just recently did is the city adopted a new temporary building permit fee waiver program, where essentially, if a developer wishes to build an ADU, a duplex, a triplex, a cottage development, or a multifamily development, if they promise that those units are going to be utilized for people at or below 80% AMI until 2028, so 5 years from now, then we'll waive those building permit fees. Now, there are still other development review fees associated with it, what we will put aside our small building permit fee, with the understanding that they're providing a service to the community. They're directly filling that gap in the housing pyramid that we need. And if it costs us a couple $1,000s per development to do that, then by all means, let's go ahead and do that. In the recent past, I think we've seen housing, the cost to build a house has skyrocketed. I think we've seen that that as those costs went up, if the city can just save a developer just a couple $1,000s, it's not a ton, but it's the city again putting our foot forward and saying we're willing to do as much as we can to get out of the way to see this type of development take place. And the other thing is Colleen, I'm sure you probably know the numbers better, but that 80% AMI, that's a HUD number on Clallam County at large. And so for a family of 4, I believe that's actually $62,000 or something very close to that.
Mhm.
And so,
And yeah, it changes dependent on how many people you have in your household, and it is a countywide number, which is not ideal because it is higher in Squim than it is in PA or Forks, as an example.
yeah, but it does benefit us from the city's perspective though by utilizing that HUD 80% because it is higher out in Squim. $62,000 for a family of 4 is relatively high for Port Angeles, which means a larger percentage of our residents would qualify at that 80% AMI level if a developer was interested in doing this program. Again, though, and this is me being candid at this moment, this program has been open for a month now. We had quite a bit of interest the first week or so. But after that, I mean, we've yet to have somebody come in and actually take advantage of the program. Now, obviously, we're only, 1 month into a 12-month program. But again, it kind of points to this issue that's coming up. The city continues to take motions, take steps, and we just haven't seen the actions to follow it up yet, which again, I think is important after we finish this presentation to really talk about why and then what the next steps are. Because, we've got to keep taking motions, to keep taking steps, because if we don't, it doesn't matter how many incentives or programs or policies are in the books. If they're not being utilized and we're not seeing that growth in the housing market that we need to see, it doesn't do us any good. We can take a second, we can pat ourselves on the back and say, hey, we gave it the college try. But if the fact of the matter is, if people in our community can't afford to live in their own homes or purchase homes and move into our community, put down roots, we're going to find ourselves in a world hurt in 5 years.
Yeah. I think, there's been a lot of comments in the chat here, and going back to, why is it that the lower cost homes are not being developed and sold? And it's pretty straightforward. We had at the Housing Solutions Committee at the county, we had Greg McAleer, who's a developer, present and show the analysis for a fourplex and what it would cost. And it just doesn't pencil out. It costs more to develop that than $250 a square foot, plus all of the additional costs on top of that for stormwater, for, permitting, which I know has been reduced here. But it's still, for what you can rent that unit out for, you cannot cover the costs. So so much of it has to do with state policy that locally we can't do anything about, except for be part of, our North Olympic Legislative Alliance met yesterday, and one of the big issues is housing. But everyone across the state is talking about that. And so it's that balance between the state wanting to have very well-built units and that will be able to last for decades and decades, but also that will emit very, very low carbon emissions. And so there's so much, and then of course it's supply, and the labor costs have gone up. But the point that Jim Hagwood has made here, he wrote household AMI, and that's annual median income in Port Angeles, 48,000 or so, with a 30% debt ratio, which is typically what they use in the housing market, allows for a payment of only $1,214 per month. And so, but that includes your property taxes and your insurance payments. So anyway, that is, and then what does that equal for a house? Certainly not 450 or 30,000. And so the underlying economics don't support what people need. So we got to chip away at it, I think, is what Holden's talking about. Every place where we can lower the cost of a housing unit, we've got to do so that we can get closer and closer to it. But, you know, 60% of area median income, I just don't know how we're going to be able to support those people. And right now we can't even support 100% of AMI. So my thought is always that when you create a policy, the higher you put it, the better, but then you bump into gifting of public funds issues. So anyway, sorry, I should stop.
No, this is good.
For 10 years, I was a commercial real estate agent in the county, broker, and I did a lot of multifamily, and I've interviewed 8 different developers trying to get them to come to our area, and why would they not? And anyway, I'll talk about that in a bit. Holden, do you want to go on, or do you want to have Jim share his thoughts?
No, we've nearly wrapped it up. We're real close. Okay. But what I want to kind of get to, Colleen, with what you just said too, you know, there are certainly a lot of systemic issues here. There's a lot of things beyond our control. But what we don't want to do here at the city is be so enamored with the problem that we just stare back and admire it. You know, eventually, you know, we've got to put our nose to the grindstone. We got to get in there. We got to chip away at it. And you know, the thing is that just as the issues outside of our control have gotten worse, you know, if fingers crossed, right? You know, they might get better for us. And at that stage, the city needs to be ready if some sort of market event happens, or if there's motion towards, you know, getting favorable results. If something changes, the city has to be ready to capitalize on it. Because I think part of the issue that we have here is that we didn't build these houses 15 years ago. You know, we didn't build these houses when market conditions would have been favorable. And so now we're looking at it at a time period when they're not. And we're saying, oh, so much stuff is beyond our control. But, you know, who's to say, you know, that again, in 15 more years, things obviously will be different. But how they're different, I couldn't tell you. Nobody could. But, you know, we got to be ready for when they are. And so anyway, new temporary building permit fee waiver. If anybody wants to build a house and promises that they're going to give it to somebody at 80% AMI for the next 5 years, after that, it can go market rate. If you're building a duplex and you want to live in one and rent the other one out, we'll cover the whole building permit fee waiver. We really want to focus on that variety of houses or housing, which is why it's ADUs, duplexes, triplexes, cottage developments, multifamily, basically everything but single family development. Because again, we've got a lot of that. But if anybody is interested, please reach out and we can do something related to that. So moving forward, we continue to look for updates to the Title 17, where we want to add flexibility for development. Colleen, I think this goes back to, you know, the case that we alluded to. If there's a situation where in the past housing has been proposed but not allowed for any reason, we got to figure out why, and then what we can do to make motion so that it can be allowed. Just last night, we had a very, very productive city council meeting where we were looking at some of the issues related to transitional housing and safe parking in our community. I continue to work on developing ADU, duplex, and infill housing permit-ready site plans, with the idea being that if you want to build a duplex or an ADU or some infill housing, you can come get a set of plans from the city. And we've already done a lot of the work on the front end, obviously, to make the permitting process easier and more affordable. And then already, it's 2022 comprehensive plan update in 2025. It's a big opportunity again to look at, Port Angeles as a whole and figure out how we can shape ourselves for the next 20 years to come. Bottom line, housing remains the number one priority for the city of Port Angeles. People have to have a place to live. At some point, the city of Port Angeles has to decide what kind of community we want to be. And I think right now we want to be a community where the people who live and work, or the people who live here, or rather the people who work here, can live here as well. And we have to make sure that we're providing housing for all income spectrums, all the way from 0% AMI up to 500% AMI. I believe thoroughly that a rising tide is going to lift all boats, and so just adding housing is very important. As a planner, I can also tell you that zoning can't solve the housing issue by itself. Zoning alone won't be enough, but by making zoning more flexible, it can help. On the flip side, we have to understand that if we do a bad job with our zoning, if we do a bad job with these, kind of baseline regulations, it can really hurt the housing situation too. And that's what we want to avoid. A big part of the reason we find ourselves in here too is because townhouses weren't allowed until 2017. ADUs weren't allowed until very recently. And had we changed zoning earlier, we'd already be further along, but we didn't. We have now, we've corrected it, we're moving forward. We want to continue to look for ways to remove those barriers to housing. Colleen, you talked about just very briefly some of the economic issues that are at play here. The city obviously plays a relatively small part in those larger issues, but again, we want to do everything we can to get out of the way and make it easier, because we do understand that, housing is such a vital part of people's lives. We understand that when somebody buys their first home in Port Angeles, it's a big step forward for them. We understand that, housing is typically, an individual's largest percentage of their wealth. The house is the single largest investment that many people make. But even short of that, before they can buy that first house, they need to be able to rent an apartment at an affordable level where it isn't 50% of their income. It's not, we want to get that debt to income ratio down. More than just single family develops is needed. I think we've seen a lot of this stuff is focused on that missing middle, that variety of housing types, because the type of house that you needed 10 years ago is different. Well, the type of housing that I had 10 years ago, obviously very different than the housing that I need now. And it's going to be different from the housing that I need 50 years from now. And then finally, a community approach is essential. I'm speaking for the city of Port Angeles today, but obviously, Port Angeles is not an island separate from all the rest of reality. We have the county surrounding us. We have our other municipalities that we work with. We are within Washington state, and then, the United States as a whole. And we have to look at that community approach to solving these issues, because we're never going to be able to do it by ourselves. So I think that's right at 8:40. So we got about 20 minutes for discussion. And why don't we go to Jim? He's got his hand up there. And I'd love to just pass it to him.
Thank
Great.
you, Holden. Thanks, Colleen. So first of all, I just want to mention that tomorrow morning at the Port Angeles Association of Realtors, we're going to have an extended conversation on this also with Greg McAleer with Westera Homes, and Kayla Cutting with Sage Homes are going to be at our morning breakfast from 8:30 to 9:30 at Bethany Pentecostal Church at 5th and Francis. So if you're interested in coming and listening further to a discussion about what are the challenges that home builders are facing in our community, you're welcome to come. But my point is that there is an economic imbalance here that we need to recognize. And I compliment the city on the efforts that they're making, but we also have to understand the reality of the economics, and particularly with the city's program to be 80% of AMI. You're talking that for a household income in Port Angeles, 80% is about $38,850. So when you lower that to and apply that 30% debt to income ratio, you're only talking about the ability to pay $970 a month. And for an investor to recognize an 8% return on Colleen, that duplex that you were talking about, you need to charge about $1,800 a month. So there's an economic imbalance that city policy is not going to change. So we need to recognize first and fundamentally that that is the market that we're in here. And I do appreciate the city removing permit costs and all that, but the challenge we have is bigger than permit costs. So, you know, we're to try to build housing for families at 80% of average median income in Port Angeles is, let's call it what it is. It would have to be subsidized housing at 50% of the cost of that. That's the nature and the reality that we're in regards to both cost of construction and what that return on investment for that is. So again, in Port Angeles, we're in an economic imbalance, and I have been and we've had discussions before about, we can get into a little bit later. There were some points on the chat about you know, in Port Angeles, there are about from the housing study, there are about 1,175, the ability for about 1,175 7,000 square foot lots in Port Angeles left, vacant land inside the city limits. Well, we have a need for about 12,000 to meet the demand of what that housing study looks at. So I have been a proponent for many years of, we need more land base that is affordable to be able to build these larger developments and multifamily things, because inside the city of Port Angeles right now, land base is limited, and it's very difficult, and the economics don't work to just buy 2 lots, tear down 2 houses, and build an 8-plex. It just, the economics don't work. So I guess my point is to recognize that what is the reality we're in, and to understand that the pure economics of it is very important. So thank you.
You know, I want to add on to what Jim said there. And there were some questions in the chat, I think from Lori Mittman, asking about, has the city thought of building some developments? And the problem there is twofold. Number one, as soon as you use a government dollar, all sorts of regulations kick in, like prevailing wages, which are, even though affordable housing prevailing wages are supposed to be lower, Department of L&I has not updated all of them. They're still basically King County's prevailing wages for commercial, for painters and tile setters, etc. So that makes it more expensive. But then also you have all sorts of regulatory issues that come into play, like requests for proposals and that kind of thing. But even just you know, Peninsula Housing Authority provides subsidized housing and owns a lot and manages a lot of rental properties up near the Port Angeles Boys and Girls Club, as an example. And their cost to build beyond the other, you know, items are about $350 a square foot.
Yeah.
And no, that doesn't include the land, that doesn't include sewer and those kind of things, but $350 a square foot. Whereas a private party is $250 a square foot. But then Habitat for Humanity, they do projects at $85 a square foot because they use sweat equity and because they get a lot of donations. So you know, it seems kind of evident to me that if we want to build as many units as possible, putting a lot of support around Habitat for Humanity makes a lot of sense to me. Somebody could tell me why that doesn't, but it does seem to make sense. So Rick, you had a question. Do you want to ask yours about, go ahead.
Oh, I have so many questions. The one you're mentioning is about housing cooperatives, which have been a very useful tool in other communities to keep home ownership costs lower. So that's a question. The other one I have is, I mean, I know this one's been beat to death, but just wanting to raise the thought about the impact of absentee ownership and vacation rentals on the cost of housing in our community as well.
Yeah, so let's see, the first item I wanted to talk about, and Holden, you probably has more to add about housing cooperatives and the like, but is that if you use a government dollar, and whether that's city money or state money, what kicks in is something, and if it's a multifamily project, what kicks in is something called the Evergreen Sustainable Development Standards. And that not only adds requirements to the city code, but it also, and it's like 314 pages was the latest version of it. It also adds costs going forward forever, like the management of it, and you have to do all these reports. And so when Peninsula Behavioral Health bought the Allview Motel and was converting it into, was it, how many units were there, Holden, do you recall? Anyway, they couldn't believe, they did not recognize the immense costs that would be incurred due to prevailing wages and all the requirements of this state mandated evergreen sustainable building standards. So, and when you talk to Mike Chapman or Representative Theringer about this and talk about, you know, hey, do you realize you're setting this bar so high that we cannot even get started. And the number of units that we could create is cut by, 2/3 because of these additional costs that you're adding. So, but the response they share is that in the legislature, their opinion is if we are going to spend government dollars, we want these units to last and be built really well. And we want them to emit a very low amount of carbon emissions. One of the, as an example, one thing that Peninsula Behavioral Health was dealing with was they were required by this Evergreen Sustainable Development Standards for their hotel, instead of being able to use one unit or couple units that would heat and cool all of the property there, they had to have individual units in every single little room. And so, I mean, and there's no waiver from that, unfortunately. So, it's got to be, when we tackle housing, it's got to be something that is, we got to hit every single avenue. And to me, there's a very different set of issues for private industry building the missing middle, they call it, the, duplexes and up to apartments versus government supported housing units. Completely different set of constraints and issues involved. And then also, Rick, you asked if there's a shortage of contractors locally with inclination, experience to build multifamily. I think the biggest thing is it doesn't pencil. What is economically feasible is building high-end homes, and that you can make money, and people have been buying those historically. Now with interest rates going up, that may change. And I think the answer is to grow our own and to try to provide some support services to our existing builders that may have an interest in delving into this space but trying to keep it out of government money so that we can, we don't, all these different regulations don't kick in. And I just wanted to share that back in 2019, before COVID and before the prices skyrocketed, because we had the multifamily tax exemption, which is a really cool program that if you build anywhere in the city limits of the city of Port Angeles, you don't have to pay taxes on the improvement, property taxes for 8 years. And if you have an affordable housing element, it's up to 12 years. So that is a great incentive, and that doesn't kick in all these government things. And then also we also have an opportunity zone. And so I was trying to advocate for opportunity zone, that, hey, we've got these areas in our county that are opportunity zones. You can save on your capital gains taxes. So I met with 8 different developers that I'd worked with over the years, or that a friend introduced me to. And consistently, what I found was, number one, the demand and the return is greater elsewhere and then our county. And number two, there were 3 issues. That was number one. Number 2 was that if they came into Port Angeles or Sequim, it was a set of people and subcontractors that they were not used to working with, and so that created risk. Whereas at their current location, they knew what all the risks were. And then lastly, they look at, an investor, their investors want to see that they continue to make money off of their investment, and CPI goes up. So they want to make sure that they can increase rents. But if you don't have a track record of median income increasing, then there's not a great likelihood that you'll be able to increase your rents. So those were the 3 issues that came back over and over from these developers when I said, hey, look at all these wonderful things we have to offer, and what their reasoning was why they were not interested and would not do that. So I see Randy, you have your hand up?
I do.
Randy's an absolute expert in this space.
Oh, I'm not an
Both
absolute.
sides. Yeah,
I'm
you
not
are.
an expert in anything, so thank you. And I've got a question for Holden based on our discussion at NOLA yesterday. But before I get there, I want to say the self-help build program, which we talked about in Habitat, Peninsula Housing Annie's on the line too. They also do the same thing. And as far as I'm concerned, that's something we should try to get behind no matter what. I think those are almost unanimity in the neighborhood about this makes sense. Sweat equity, and people get into houses that wouldn't get there any other way. And I think all of us, the more we can help get behind those kinds of programs, the better off. The B part, I wanted to emphasize what Jim said a little bit, and I'm wearing an investor hat now. When Greg McAleer came in and looked at the fourplex, and you look at it, this is before interest rates jumped again by another 2%. And you looked at it, it's about, for that fourplex, it was a break even to make a little bit of money, took at least $2,000 a month rent, $2,000. And please remember, if I'm a builder and everyone says, oh, those wealthy builders, here you go. If I go borrow that, I'm personally liable for that loan. I keep emphasizing that amongst many other things. And so you have to look at the basic economics. I mean, every little bit helps, but I always like to plug everything in the model and say, does this really get me there or not? And I hate to say it, but right now, multifamily, the basic economics don't get us there. And then number 3, Holden, my question to you, we were talking a little bit about mobile home parks yesterday, which seemed to be another very viable alternative. And Lindsay had one thought, and I haven't done the research behind it, but is there an opportunity in the city of Port Angeles for that? It seems like that might be one alternative that could make a lot of sense. I say that I haven't run any numbers, but question.
Yeah, so mobile homes, manufactured homes, at this point, the city of Port Angeles has some pretty high restrictions on how they can be placed and where they can be placed. You know, Randy, to your point, as we look to move forward, I think that's another thing that we have to consider. You know, traditionally, manufactured homes, maybe there are certain communities, certain neighborhoods where that has not been appreciated. And, you know, so there's for obvious reasons, there's been a lot of pushback against that type of development, that type of placement. I think, as you're alluding to, though, as we move forward, if that's the thing that makes sense, then that's the thing that makes sense. And we need to, as a community, be willing to look at that and say, hey, you know, the benefits outweigh the costs. In this case, the costs being lower is a big benefit to it. So it's something that the city needs to look at and consider. And so right now, it is relatively restrictive. That's something moving forward that I think the city needs to reckon with. And it's something that we need to at least, like you said, plug the numbers in and see if it makes sense, if that'll get us moving the needle. Because, you know, we've tried a lot of other stuff and it hasn't moved the needle. You know, that'd be just one more thing to try at this point.
There was a comment by Annie O'Rourke, who, again, absolute expert. Annie, you want to talk about your comment, and then I want to have a follow-up there.
So I was just talking a little bit about prevailing wage requirements, and it really has to do with where the money is coming from. So if it's federal funds, we're receiving some sort of federal funding to build a building, we have to comply with Davis-Bacon requirements. And then I think I gave you the number there for the laborer actually is the Davis-Bacon number. Mm-hmm. And then if we are getting monies from Department of Commerce or any other state funding, we have to comply with the state prevailing wage. And the carpenter number that I gave there of 71 something an hour is what we would need to pay via our contractor to those employees that are acting in that role. If we have both state and federal monies in the deal, we are picking the highest wage rate between those two different lists of wages. And so things can get pretty expensive when you're looking at prevailing wage.
Yeah, I want to share screen for a moment. And this is something that I have talked to our legislators about. So I downloaded the prevailing wages from, I don't know if you can see this very well. I'll try to zoom in here. But I downloaded every August, they update this. And so I downloaded the wages for carpenters. Okay, and this is what Annie's talking about. So in Clallam County, and this is not residential, this is carpenters for commercial. This is the wage rate for Clallam County, which is $71.53. And then here's King County's wages, exactly the same, $71.53, because the state legislature changed the law that instead of doing surveying of business owners asking what they pay to set a prevailing wage, they're using the collective bargaining agreement set by Associated General Contractors, which is a nonprofit group out of Seattle that is a consortium of commercial builders, and they negotiate with like the carpenters union. So, but they created their geography to say that they cover all of Western Washington. So that wage rate for commercial carpenters is $71.53. Now, but the affordable housing group said, listen, there's no way that we can build anything affordable if we have to pay these commercial union wage rates. And so the answer was, okay, well, we'll do surveys for those areas. Well, look what happened here in this. I'm going to highlight this. So the state did not, they did a survey of residential carpenters in King County. It's $36.44. But guess what? it looks like they never did that survey for our county. We are still at the commercial rate of 71.53. So, you know, even though our median income in our county is half that of King County, ours is 187% higher than King County's, because they never did a survey for Clallam County. I don't know if that was really complex, but, and I have talked to our legislators about it. I think, Annie, you ought to be talking to LNI and saying, you know, this is baloney. Ours should at least be the same rate as King County's. You know, it shouldn't be 187% higher than King County's.
The one challenge that we have stumbled across in the past with some of our construction is there aren't contractors here locally that have capacity to do an $18 million project. So we are securing contractors from the I-5 corridor. The I-5 corridor contractors typically will only pay commercial wage rates. It's part of their contract with the union. They will, I mean, they just have a higher pay schedule for their employees that they ship out here to help us build. So we can't, sometimes we just can't get around it because it's actually the contractor that has agreements with the different unions that say they're going to pay their contractors a certain minimum wage. And so, you know, even if there is a residential rate that was dropped, for instance, for our area, we have bumped up against the fact that we have no contractors with capacity in the county, and we're paying those Seattle corridor, I-5 corridor wage rates anyway.
Yeah. Well, we are as part of the state policies that negatively impact poor and rural communities. One of the things we're proposing is that what you're talking about is a signatory. When a large contractor a general contractor has signed agreements with unions saying we will only hire union contractors. What people in poor communities in the I-5 corridor and in rural communities are talking about is mandating that if a general contractor gets a contract for a government project, they have to subcontract with local qualified subcontractors if they're available. That will eventually likely entice these general contractors not to sign these signatory agreements with only unions, because that definitely is impacting our ability to, you know, our local government property taxes are being exported to the I-5 corridor, and it just shouldn't be happening. So, Holden, you've probably read a bunch of these questions now in the chat. Are there any you want to address? Oh, and I see we're 9:05. So, sorry, you know, start me on this topic and I'll go off. It makes me mad.
All right. So let me look through this really quick. Let me see if I can find any that I think will be a good one to talk about. There's one here by Rebecca Miller. As the city considered legislation around short-term rentals. So the city contracted with a law group to do some studies on the impacts of short-term rentals to our local market. That information, that study is ongoing. That's something I would look to see some action on in the next year, one way or the other. At this stage, council has not indicated their position, so I can't speak to that, other than to say that council is very interested in the situation and getting more information related to it. But I think, you know, short-term rentals are something that everyone can hop on Airbnb and see that there's 250 listings in Port Angeles and say, huh, that probably does something. And so, yeah, it's something that the city is aware of. It's something that the city is engaged in a fact-finding mission related to. And it's something that I would expect in a short time period that we see some statement about. That does flow into another question that I saw here. Are incentives and subsidies for owners of long-term rentals an option? I think that plays part and part with the short-term rentals. Obviously, if the option is between a short-term rental and a long-term rental, the city, or at least as the housing coordinator, I will tell you, I'd be much more interested in supporting a long-term rental, with the idea being that it's going to be likely utilized by a resident of our community who works in a position that benefits the community long-term. So thank you for that idea. Thank you that it's not just me thinking that that's something that we should be looking at. It's something that, again, as we address short-term rentals, I imagine that'll be the flip side of it. To get to Rick's question about housing cooperatives, it's my understanding that housing cooperatives is more of a legal framework associated with the ownership of the housing. I would be more concerned with what type of structure is being built and where it's built at. If you and your friends want to get together and build yourself a housing cooperative, give me a call. Let's get those steps forward. If there's any barriers or hurdles, again, the city, it's housing is housing. How you decide to own it is up to you. I mean, we already have condos and other unique ownership frameworks. Why not a housing co-op? Prevailing wages, Davis Bacon. I remember doing those surveys. I feel for you, Annie. 25 units at Allview. Nothing.
So Holden, I have a quick question.
Yes.
It goes back to where you started, supply and demand. I know that some of the articles I've read say that a third of the housing inventory has been pulled off the market through the investor community. And because of short-term rental profitability and the economics of that, as interest rates have climbed and therefore prices have, the economics have changed. Do you see, what are you forecasting the effect of that on the local market? How will that impact inventory? And I mean, if we've lost a third of the inventory to kind of the investor market, do we just need to replace that, and how long will it take to do that, et cetera?
Yeah, so economists much smarter than me have tried to put a number on that. I want to say that the amount that an active short-term rental market impacts the long-term rental market, I believe, is 20%. It increases the cost of that rental by 20%. And so, me not being smart in this particular regard, that's going to be a soundbite. Okay. Anyway, it would be my guess that you'd probably want to offset the housing market by roughly 20%. And so, in order to do that, again, if we're only building 40 houses or 40 units a year, that's going to take a while. And at the same time, if the incentives continue to push long-term rentals into short-term rentals, that's a problem that, again, if not addressed quickly, it could get a little bit out of hand. I think, part of the issue there too, and somebody mentioned it in the chat, and this is not a local thing, but obviously there needs to be a balance between renters and landlords, tenants and so right now we have a state framework that is very favorable towards tenants, and that can lead to some risk for people considering renting their property to long-term people. That doesn't exist if you do short-term rentals. And so I think all of these things really interconnect with one another. And that's, again, why it's such a complex issue. And that's why there's no silver bullets that we're going to be able to pull out and say, aha, if we just do this one thing, it's going to solve everything. Because, if a starter home, as is a term that used to be used a lot, is bought by an investor and converted to a short-term rental, that house can no longer be purchased by that first-time home buyer. Then what is that person who would have bought the house going to do instead? Well, they're likely to remain in their current rental that they have, or seek housing elsewhere that could be different. So the point is, it's all related. Matthew, if you can figure out a solution, you're over at the City of Sequim, just email me and
Yeah,
we'll do the
right.
same thing over here.
Well, I will tell you, and you've made it, you've commented several times, this is not a local issue. This is, you came from Texas, they're struggling, North Carolina is struggling, Utah is struggling. I mean, this is a national issue. So, lots of places to look for answers. I don't know what it is, but it's a national.
Yeah, but we keep working on it. And I think that's what I want the big takeaway to be, is that, everyone in this room is here because they care about this issue. All working together, we'll get a lot more done than any one of us by ourselves. And I want to thank everyone again for coming in early this morning to listen to me go through the PowerPoint, because I know that's all how we love to start our days. So thank you, Colleen, for the opportunity.
Yeah,
Thank
absolutely.
you
And I
to
gotta
everybody.
say,
Yeah.
you, congratulations. We have never gone this long past 9 o'clock. So
Sorry.
it's because it's an interesting issue. No, you captured everyone's attention. Great job. All right. So thanks, everyone. This recording will be available on Choose Clallam First, and which, by the way, is now going to be integrated into our clallam.org website here shortly. But if you go to that, it will redirect you to our page. We are, we're working on our new website that'll come out very soon. Okay. Thanks, everybody, and have a great day.
Thank you.